Here for this special session, and also see a lot of new faces, which is always welcome. Those of you who are coming here for the first time, if you want to be added to the mailing list, please let me know. We'll be more than happy to send out invitations for other talks as well. But today, we have one of our own, who's unfortunately not been here for the last 3 years, Professor Xinshu Zhao, who has been on leave from UNC for the last 3 years. And he's been chair professor as well as dean at Hong Kong Baptist University. Now, many grad students who are new, who don't know about Xinshu is one of our star methodologists and has a big name in the field. Also, along with Jane Don, part of the Wisconsin Mafia, has got his PhD from Wisconsin. So he's been here for a long, long time with several varied research interests, looking at it in terms of political communication, voting behaviors, and elections. Xinshu, along with Bob Stevenson, for a long time was in charge of the Carolina poll here. Also done a lot of really interesting work in terms of cultural psychology, especially as it pertains to advertising and media effects, with South Asia as well as the US populations. And most importantly, he's also a fantastic super methodologist. And even though he says that he's really interested in both the qualitative and the quantitative paradigms, it's very clear that his bent is more towards the quantitative side of things. Now, this issue, given this fantastic audience that we have today, given it being a Wednesday afternoon, it's pretty clear that all of you certainly appreciate the importance of mediation analysis, and most of you are familiar with the classic Baron and Kenny article from 1986, which many people now refer to as not so much of a classic, right? And this is an issue which I know many of you here have grappled with, Francesca and Janice and Joe Bob, among others, who certainly given a lot of thought to this issue. And Xinshu has been talking about this now for at least my knowledge alone for ever since I came here for the interview, which was 2001, so quite some time now. And it's finally, many of his thoughts, both philosophical as well as statistical, have materialized in this forthcoming article in one of the top journals in all of social sciences, in the Journal of Consumer Research. And many of us feel that this is going to be one of those classic landmark articles, which in another 10, 20 years we'll be talking about it in terms of Zhao et al. So without much further ado, we'll leave it to Xinshu to talk about his perspectives on mediation analysis.
Thank you. I didn't realize that all these words could be put together and describe me. Don would say that what Sri described was a total stranger. But it's nice to especially talk to you right now. Actually, the article has just been put online, published online, but it will come out in paper format in August. It's very nice that my first talk about it is with the graduate students in Carroll Hall, because it did start with a dissertation by Heman. Don might remember him. He's now teaching at the New Mexico State. And about his dissertation, and his dissertation was rejected. The original idea was rejected by Jim Bedman of Duke School of Business, and this says, for a reason C prime doesn't work, and I will explain to you in a minute. And I did teach the methodology course here. At the time it was 300 level course, so I understand most of the people here in this building are not that crazy about numbers, so I will make it as non-quantitative as I can. Actually, the non-quantitative part is the fun part. So let me just describe briefly what we mean by mediation. Probably you haven't had that in your classes, I assume. So it's relatively simple. It's not that mathematical. Just ignore that part for the moment. You assume that we have an independent variable and we have a dependent variable. That's easy, simple enough, straightforward. But let's assume there is an effect. There is a third variable that is a dependent variable in relation to the x variable. And I'm just going to start to use the word x and y, and then m standing for mediator. And that mediator is an independent variable in relation to the y variable. And that is a typical three-variable non-recursive, meaning that we are not assuming any effect backwards, like y, we are not assuming that y affects m, or m affects x, or y affects x. Therefore, we call it non-recursive three-variable model. Seems to be very simple, but extremely powerful in explaining the relationship when you have a so-called mediator. Typically, people start with the assumption that, definition, that if x affects m and m affects y, m is the mediator. Or you say that there is a mediation. Statistically, now I talk a little bit about statistics. Statistically means the A path is significant and the B path is significant. There is no controversial there. Okay? And then in 1986, when Bell and Kenny's article came out, number one, they made a tremendous contribution, make it clear, put it on the table, and make it in the layman's term, make it understandable to everybody, number one. And secondly, they differentiated mediation from moderation, which I'm not talking about today. Later, when we have chances, we can talk about moderation. It's a very interesting topic as well. And the third major contribution that Barron and Kenny made was put in the step-by-step fashion. How do you establish a mediation? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the steps they took. They described for the researchers to take. Number one, you run 3 models, statistical models, relatively simple. If you don't, you are not too interested in it, you can ignore most of it. Basically, you run the regression that with the m as the dependent variable and x as the independent variable, and then you run another model with y as the dependent variable and x as the independent variable. 2 simple regressions, straightforward enough. And the third equation, you have x and m, both the independent and the mediator in the equation as independent variables. Computer really doesn't know what's the difference between the mediator and the independent variable. It's all independent variable as long as the statistical computer is concerned. So, and then you have the y as a dependent variable. Three simple regression equations, simple enough. And then they say, how do you establish mediation after you run these three equations? I can give you this quote directly from page 1177 from their article. And basically what they are saying, so I will go back and put in a very simple term. Basically what they are saying is that A must be significant, B must be significant, okay? Simple enough, consistent with the original layman's definition of what mediation is. But thirdly, and that's the key, C prime must be significant in the second equation. Now what is C prime? C prime is the simple correlation between x and y. For the moment, you ignore m, ignore the mediator. You just run a regression between x and y and see if x is affecting y. Okay? They say that this must be significant as well, and the result is the C prime. If you see an effect, you say C prime is significant. Basically, that's the case. You see that there is only one independent variable and one dependent variable, and then the coefficient must be significant than C prime. So conceptually, what is C prime? A very attractive conceptualization here is that you must establish there is an effect to be mediated before you look for mediation. Very appealing, simple to understand. And that is where human got stuck. You run that first equation, the second equation, of course, then it's listed as a second equation, but conceptually was described as the first condition. You first establish there is an effect to be mediated before you go any further. If there is no effect to be mediated, stop. There is no mediation, do something else. Either throw out the data or switch the model or find other variables to work with. And I was not from that tradition of that literature. At the time, I was ignorant enough to say that didn't make sense. Because I was from the more statistical training saying that C prime is something else. C prime is mathematically is A multiplied by B plus C. And I can show you these statistics, the mathematics to prove it. It's a mathematical must. C prime is A times B plus C. Now what does that mean? Remember, A is the half of the mediated path. B is another half of the mediated path. A times B is the mediated path. Okay? A plus B, A multiplied by B and plus C means it is the total effect. That is also in the literature. Way before Barron and Kenny, the statisticians and methodologists knew that C prime equals A multiplied by B plus C. And some people also said that means total effect. But also, Barron and Kenny said that that is also C prime is the effect to be mediated. And therefore, you need to establish that. And once that is done, the fact that C prime equals A multiplied by B plus C almost was forgotten. And then it was so popular, I can show you some statistics. Barron Kenny was cited, now I think it's 10,000 times now. It's just broke that part already after we ran the statistics. Because we were targeting the consumer research and marketing area, so we also run a statistic from Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing, and Journal of Marketing Research. It shows that the influence is far beyond either communication or consumer research, psychology, sociology, medical science, social work, everywhere. And the number is also increasing, I believe. You can see the citations that between 2006, 2002, and 2008. Every year there was an increase, I believe, yes. And then up to 2008, and when we did the search in the September of 2009, just last year, it already surpassed the entire 2008. So it keeps going up, the influence. Now, a moment ago, I also showed you some statistics saying that, wait a minute, C prime is also the total effect. And then they say sometimes there might be a problem when you first force people to establish C prime before you go on to test mediation. And these numbers, there are quite a few papers, several papers of them. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes, it's right there. All of these articles, in one way or the other, says there might be a problem. And there was, it would have been considered to be a huge hit if it was a typical article. But because it's talking about mediation in comparison with Barron and Kenny, it's almost ignored in the daily practice. And we picked it up and we say that we want to do a more comprehensive job in looking at what happened. And also, I will talk a little bit, if I have the time, why it continues to be so influential and why the other descending articles, the views were ignored. First, let's go back to the model and think about it. We know that C prime is a total effect. Okay? Let's think about the possibility that the mediator has an opposite effect on the line as the direct path, the C path. So we call it the indirect path, or the mediated path versus the direct path. What if the indirect path has an opposite effect of the direct path? Now let me give you an example. I'm working with Jen also on the impact of communication on sexual behavior. So we know that everybody believes that condom usage would have an impact on the sexually transmitted disease. And we believe there is a negative effect. The more condom protection, the less disease. That is the direct path. What if there is a mediator that we didn't think too much of? Let's say, perceive the risk. The more condom you use, the safer you feel. So perceive the risk goes up, perceive the risk goes down, right? And then you have, when the perceived the risk goes down, you might have more of the sexual behavior, activities. Because the protection is not 100%, even though you're aware of protection, the chances of disease still goes up, right? So the more available the condom is through the indirect path, mediated by the perceived risk, that might have a positive effect on the disease, depending on the relative comparative strengths of each path. The outcome could be positive, negative, or wash. Right? Now, if that's the case, when you think of C prime as a total effect, it could be non-significant if it's a wash or close to a wash. Yet, it doesn't mean that mediation doesn't exist. On the contrary, it might make it very, very interesting. Especially interesting for the researchers to look into. Another example, just a few months ago, I believe either Times Magazine or Newsweek published a summary article about the impact of exercise on weight loss. And they say that exercise might have a negative effect on the weight loss, or opposite. The more exercise you do, some people gain more weight. And the reason being that the more exercise they do, they eat more. So exercise has a direct negative effect on the body weight. At the same time, because you eat more, the eating becomes the mediator. You eat more, you gain more weight. Now, depending on the relative comparative effect of the two paths, the result again could be positive, negative, or even. So that was one reason that C prime does not have to be significant in order to establish mediation. Especially, we say that C prime should not be the first test, and the veto test for somebody to even stop or abandon a program of research. There is a second reason, it's more statistical, why C prime does not have to be significant. That is, suppose that, let's imagine that we know that A is significant and B is significant and C is not. In other words, there is only an indirect effect or only a mediated effect. The direct effect is not significant. What does that mean? It probably means that effect is too small, or the error term here is too large. In other words, the evidence is not clear. The error is too large, and then evidence is not clear. We cannot establish a direct effect. When the error term is too large here, and when you look at total effect, it's the error of both added together. It could make the C prime, or total effect, not significant, meaning no clear evidence for the total effect. It does not mean that the mediated effect is not there. Give you two types of the possible mediations. One is when the two paths compete with each other. So we call it competitive mediation. Okay? And another type is only the indirect path is there, so we call it indirect only mediation, and we already realized that in both cases, C prime, if you look at, force people to look at C prime as the first condition, it could be a problem. We say that the C prime test or XY test, direct X and Y, you look at their simple correlation, could be misleading. What are the other types of mediation are there? You know, Bannon, Kenny, or nobody else did anything like that, and we say that let's put all the possibilities on the table and see how the C prime test or the XY test behave in all those cases. So we put out a typology. And that was not, eventually was not published. We lay out all the possibilities of the three variable non-recursive model. This is one possibility, that is a possibility. Basically, establish one and then change one path at a time. Eventually, that we got all of them and then we flipped them to see when, in what situation. We looked at each of these models and see when the C prime could be significant and when the C prime is could not be significant. A lot of mathematical derivations going on, but the result is this. Now you could flip one of those variables, the coding. Originally, let's say 10 is approval, maximum approval, and 0 is minimum approval, and then you switch, you flip the coding and make the 10 minimum approval and 0 maximum approval. You can flip it, it doesn't change anything, okay? The statistical test would be the same, but those signs would change. And if you include that possibilities, then the expanded model is more complicated. So I'm not going to go into details, the same situation. And but the concise or simple typology is this. And we realized there are only 3 types of mediations. Complement means that both paths were positive or both were negative. You can flip one of them and get both negative, and it's still complement. In other words, flipping the coding of one of the variables does not change the type. Okay? So we concentrated on this one for explaining things, and then realized there are 3 types. Complement models, competition models, when both sides, both paths were significant, but their direction is the opposite. And then indirect only. Okay, so we've already established when you have indirect only, XY test or the C prime test is misleading. It could make a mediation look like no mediation. Same thing here with the competition, I explained why. And then in the situation of the complement mediation, because both were significant and pointing at the same direction, it's a mathematical must that C prime will be significant and have the same sign. In other words, in that situation, an XY test or C prime test is redundant, is not needed. From the derivation of the mathematics, we know C prime is significant. So you have only 3 situations. In 2 situations, it is misleading, it's wrong, it could be wrong. And then in the third situation, it's redundant, it's not needed. So in no situations, if you want to establish mediation, in no situations, XY test is needed. Okay? Now, course, there are two situations that you don't have the mediation, and there are some different situations. We'll look into that as well, and then we believe that there are theoretical reasons to look into them as well. But I'm not going to go into too much details of it. Then at that point, we realize that we have a very different understanding, a very different conceptual model about what mediation is in comparison with Barron and Kenny and most of the other authors, including those people who criticized Barron and Kenny in terms of the necessity of the XY test in some situations. None of them said that XY test is never needed. They only said in some situations, such as, what they didn't call it a competition, but they call it suppression. When you have suppression, maybe the XY test is not needed. But in comparison with all of them, we realize that our understanding of mediation, especially what types of mediations are there, is very different from Barron and Kenny. So let me go back to the Barron and Kenny typology of mediation. In addition to step-by-step procedure helping people to establish mediation, they also have a procedure helping people to classify what type of mediation do you have. And they have two types of mediations and one type of no mediation, which means that if you have C prime significant and A and B are both significant, they call it full mediation. And then, of course, if any of them, C prime, A, or B, is not significant, they say it's not significant, it's not mediation. We disputed that. We want to take out C prime. But they also say that if C prime, A, and B, and C are all significant, they call it partial mediation. See, the difference between the two types of mediation is basically in the significance of the C. In other words, if the direct path exists, if you can establish A and B and C prime, which we disputed, so for the moment we can ignore it, A and B are both significant, and C is not, then they are the happiest, because everything is mediated. They call it full mediation. But if C is also significant, meaning there is also a direct effect, they are half happy, half unhappy, because there is a mediation but not fully mediated. They call it partial mediation. Okay? And we say that, we realize that that is one of the conceptual reasons they got C prime test wrong, because the strength of the mediation should not be conditioned on the existence or non-existence of the another path. If you want to say that mediation is strong, you look at A and B. It could be significant but weak. It could be significant and strong. Just look at that. Or you can compare with the C, but the strength of the mediation is not dependent on the another path. And based on that, we have a different typology, which I just showed you, is 5 type. Competitive mediation, when both paths were significant and they are at opposite direction. Or complementary mediation, when both paths were significant and pointing at the same direction. Or you have indirect only. And then there are other 2 types of non-mediation. One is the direct only, and another is that when both paths were not significant, we say that that's no effect. So based on that, we have a different procedure of testing mediation. And of course, we also have a statistical dispute. We test A and B separately for statistical reasons. And we believe that A multiplied by B should be tested together using the bootstraps procedure, which I will not go into too much details. And it's not necessary to get into too much details. There are plenty of macros, and one of them is Haze macro, that is, you can download directly, and you can just run it. And we have an output in our paper, and we try to help people to interpret it. It's as simple as running a regression when when you use the macro. Okay? It allows point click as well. So you test A and B whether or not it's significant. Once that is significant, that is the only criteria. Once A multiplied by B is significant, you've got mediation. If you want to publish something about mediation, then you've got it. That the following steps were just trying to help you to establish what type of mediation it is. You look at C, whether or not C is significant. If the C is not significant, then you have a indirect only model of mediation. It's not necessarily the best or worst. It's just one type of mediation. If C is significant, then you look at A multiplied by B multiplied by C, see if it is above 0 or below, it's negative or positive. If it's positive, it means that the indirect and direct paths were pointing at the same direction. If it's negative, it could be very, very small, as the example that I used in the paper. Could be very, very small, but still below 0. It's still negative. When it's negative, you have a competitive mediation, and that is all you need to do in order to establish a mediation or classify its types. Now, then we went into another area that Baron and Kenny didn't quite get into. It's the conceptual understanding of what is exactly the direct path. Is the direct path absolutely, definitively, really, really direct? Using the example of condom use. Is that wearing the condom directly prevent disease? Not really. There are many, many middle steps in between that some of the medical researchers, production managers, workers might be interested in. Biologists, whoever, might be interested in. We as social scientists were not interested in it, therefore we call it a direct effect. Meaning that we want to ignore the middle steps. Right? So it's entirely possible when you see something there that we just, for the moment, we ignored, but it's still there, something worth looking into in the future research. And the following box is basically saying that. Regardless of whether or not you find mediation or no mediation, if there is a direct path, do look into it, think about whether or not a future research might look into a mediation in between. You could be a second mediator, third mediator, and so on and so forth. That's basically what we are doing in the second half of the paper. So that is basically what we, pretty much what we said in the paper. Sri want me to stop at when?
Another 10 minutes or so?
Another 10 minutes. Okay, I will just tell you a little bit about what we are thinking now. One thing is why the most important technical points were already there, even long before Benjamin McKinney. Now, why some of these points have been in at least 10 papers and never diffused to the most of the researchers. Why that could happen? And even, the idea, as I said, Heeman's dissertation defense was probably before the 1999 or 1998 when it was first rejected, and then I started to work on it, and then I went to Hawaii in 2003, I believe, or 2002, and then there I was teaching the assistant professors at the business school about some of the statistics, the regression, and path analysis, and Lizzo, and so on, and then they say you have to establish a effect to be mediated. And then I said it didn't make sense, and Chime and I started to work on a written paper. and then we submit it and reject it, submit it and reject it. Basically, you still have to, yes, all these statistical terms, all those mathematics were right. We all knew that. We knew that 30 years ago, but still we want to establish there is an effect to be mediated. And that's why between 2003 and the 2009, now it's 2010, we can publish it 7 more years. Now, why that happened, and why me as a communication researcher, Chime got her degree at Minnesota from journalism and mass communication as well, why we seems to be more persistent and insistent on that, and just insist that is wrong. And maybe there is something about communication here. When we talk about effect to be mediated, or mediated effect, or total effect, these are all symbols, represent a certain concept. And it might be a common sense. It doesn't even worth printing to say the most effective communication happened when one symbol represents one concept, and both the communicator, message sender and receiver both agree on that, right? So it's just too simple a thing. And then we all know, if you studied some of the qualitative studies, saying that that's why I put signify there. The assigning the name or the symbol to the concept is arbitrary. Right? There is no reason. There is no right name or wrong name. As long as people understand which name represents which concept. Now, another thing that we sometimes forgot is that the name, once you get used to it, at the beginning it's arbitrary when you assign it, when you give the name to a baby. Like all name is possible. There is not too much of an argument and no emotional cost of it, not too much of an emotional cost. But after 2 or 3 years, it will be very difficult to change the name. When the kid becomes an adult, it will be almost impossible in most of the situations, because there is an emotional attachment between the name and concept. And a lot of argument is about symbol. We all understand that. What happened here? Instead of one name for one concept, we have 3 names or 2 names for 2 concepts, and there is no cross, okay? That's important. We have 3 names, but only 2 concepts. Only 2 concepts. I'm sorry. That's right. We have 3 names, 3 symbols, but only 2 concepts. And I still have to use some symbols to represent them. Okay? But at a statistical level, there are only 2 things. A multiplied by B or C prime, but represented by 3 things. Especially troublesome is the thing in the middle, called effect to mediate or effect to be mediated. So when you say, I need to establish effect to be mediated, it makes all sense, right? How could you all argue to say that we do not need to establish there is an effect to be mediated before you look for a mediation? It's very difficult to argue to say that is wrong at a conceptual level. But for different people, it represents different things. Effect to be mediated for Berry and Penny is to establish C prime is significant. For those of us who have now learned Berry and Penny, effect to mediate is the same thing as the mediated effect. It represents A multiplied by B. Now, there is nothing wrong here. Everybody knows that there is a connection between these 2, and there is a connection between these 2, and C prime represent total effect. But when you say that C prime does not represent effect to be mediated, and that's where the problem is after 20 years. They learned it in the graduate school. They practiced it for 10 years, 20 years, 15 years. At the conceptual level, at the technical level, you can argue with them to say it represents total effect. But when you say that the symbol does not represent concept, establish the linkage between effect to be mediated and C prime, they cannot accept it. They might accept it at the moment, and then after they sleep it over, they forgot. They still want it to be represented, effectively mediated. And that's where it keeps getting rejected. It just doesn't make sense. You do not need to establish an effectively mediated before you can look for mediation. Although our argument is really at the conceptual level, effectively mediated should not represent C prime. But who are you to say that symbol does not represent C prime? Because it's arbitrary, right? What's wrong with by just putting this symbol on this concept? So there is no logic to that, and then it just continues to be like that. And by the way, this situation, when I presented just a few days ago, I put, the solution, of course, is to take it out, but very difficult. And so let's see if this article would work. And at least in the circle of the reviewers, that seems to be that the current version of the paper seems to get a lot of attraction among them. So hopefully it will work this time. And then plus we put in different symbols like competitive mediations, complementary mediations, and a simple, easy to use decision tree to follow. Hopefully we'll have a little better luck than the previous papers. And but the situation, I put down some of Chinese, and then because we had a similar argument in China about a totally different topic, and the conclusion I had was, again, it's in this case was two symbols representing three concepts, getting very, very emotional argument about what communication and journalism is all about in China. And so I'm just putting it here to say that this does not seem to be a single isolated case. It's the confusion between concepts and symbol. And when you mix it up, especially when you have one symbol that represents two different concepts, sometimes the argument cannot be purely logical. So let me stop here, and unless you want me to go on to talk a little bit about what else we are doing in that line. Yeah. Yes.
Can you back up?
Sure.
To your little diagram with all the little squigglies in it, where one of the first ones you showed, just the simple.
The very first one.
Okay. We have the C prime and so forth. So yeah, right there. So just for a moment, I just want to see if I can get a grasp of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So on the left side of the independent variable, I'm going to just stick in there newspaper agendas. Right? And on my right side, I'm going to put in there.
Here is the agenda.
Newspaper agendas.
Newspaper agendas.
And on the right side is audience reflection of those agendas. But the mediators are so many. Need for orientation, interest. I mean, good night. I'm beginning to wonder, is there anything that is unmediated, I mean, so to speak, in human behavior? I'm just trying to grasp what to put into the...
So you could have an agenda, let's say, so-called direct effect. It's not really direct effect, as I said a moment ago. Yeah. It's just something for the current project we decide not to look into and decide not to either measure or analyze or put into the model, so that we can concentrate on this. Really a better way of thinking about it, this is everything else. Now everything else could have a competing effect with themselves. So if you don't see any effect there, simple way of saying is that direct effect doesn't exist. But really we should understand it as everything else has not shown to have an effect. Yeah. And the reason that they have not shown could be measurement errors, could be that they are competing with each other, could be other reasons. Could be that effect is nothing else is going on. It's entirely possible. But for the moment, we are really just concentrating effect of independent variable or the agenda and the need for orientation and the agenda among the audience, and then use that as a background of comparison. And what we are saying is that even you ignore everything else to simplify things, to make it simple, it's not simple at all. Just these could be, we counted 52 possibilities. And one criticism that we had about Barry and Kenny is oversimplified. It should be three types, and they were conceptualizing it as three. There should be 5 types, but they conceptualized as the three types, and that oversimplification, conceptual oversimplification, leads to the statistical errors of treating C prime as the first criteria. My suggestion for graduate students is that start with understanding of the relationship between an X and a Y first. Do some analysis of it. When you are dissatisfied with it, or your reviewers, as Don suggested, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in our field, you can still publish an article saying that X affects Y. And then later people wanted to say that you have control variables in Don's term. Covariate basically says that there is a third variable that we want to ignore instead of the mediator is something that we want to factor into our model. You just ignore it, so you control for it. You can control for 10, you can control for 5, and then establish there is an X and Y relationship. And then, especially first in the psychology, and then in the consumer research, behavior research, and so on, they say that's too simple, and for good reasons, right? When we say direct effects of X on Y, it's really everything else. But when you have even ignored M, it's really everything put into one path, right? Including the mediation, possible mediation. When you ignore that, as I said, it's the total effect, right? When you just ignore that, it's everything get into X and Y. What I said, that this total effect should not be the reason to start a research program, is really saying that total effect didn't tell you too much, or simple correlation didn't tell you too much. And so when you realize that, you want to go a little bit more into the details of what's going on into the black box, then yes, start with a 3-variable situation like that. Then you understand it better, and then you can move on. And for the moment, a model like that, if the theory is right and the data is sound and so on and so forth, no reviewer will say that's too simple to publish.
Here's my question. What do you think of this, Reed? What's your opinion on this? What's your view on this?
Well, I mean, your earlier question, I don't think need for orientation functions as a mediator, because I think that would be a moderator. If that's what you're asking?
Yeah. No, I'm asking you about his general model.
General model, well, 3 has put in all those positive words. You asked the wrong person. He's not in a position to be critical. He cannot contradict himself anymore.
I'm looking for a few partners.
Ask Joe Bob. He would be.
Joe Bob, what's your view?
He has not commit himself.
What's your view?
And I'm not going to. Actually, I thought that, I mean, because I read this back in 2001.
Oh, that's right. Your name is in the acknowledgement paragraph.
Yeah.
So he's not. I have a preemptive strike.
So I like actually the way you presented it for the non-statisticians in this, because there are a few of those. I thought you did a good job of making the argument without going into all the stats. Because I know if you go through the stats, it works beautifully. But it's convincing people that don't have that stat background. And the message I would have to grad students from this is persistence. I mean, this is a real lesson, and if you really believe in your research and you think you've got something, you know, rejection letters are a badge of honor along the way. And, this is a great example of that.
Is that a question about the typology? So when you're trying to decide whether a particular three-variable model you're looking at is complementary or in competition, is it complementary when B and C are the same sign, or should it be when, or is it the competition? I guess like I was looking at AA2 versus B versus let's say AB2 versus BB3.
AB2,
Right.
BB3, and you are saying what's the difference between them? Right.
Well, I was trying to figure out why the first one's complementary and the second one is competitive instead of vice versa.
Oh, okay.
Because it seems like if the B and C signs are the same, then that would be more of a.
Okay, think this way. It's my fault. I didn't get into the detail of that particular thing. How do you decide the sign of a indirect path and why it's multiplied? Okay, think of this way. Using the example of exercise, I exercise 2 hours a day. Okay, and that would affect my eating. I would eat 1 gram as per hour of exercising per day. So what's the total effect? Let me not use the word total effect because we reserved it for another. So what is the effect of exercise on eating? Well, on me, well, it's 2 hours multiplied by 1 gram, right? 2 multiplied by 1. So I eat 2 grams more as a result of exercising 2 hours a day, right? So what is the effect of eating 2 grams a day on my body weight? Let's say that it increases you know, because it's every day, after 1 month you say that it increased my weight by 1 pound. Okay? So it is per pound, per gram multiplied by 1 pound, right? So what is then what is the effect of exercising, the indirect effect of exercising through eating to my body weight? It's 2 multiplied by 1 by 1. That's why it's 2 multiplication. Okay. Now we established that it's the sign is the effect of multiplying this by this. Okay. So let's look at. You're looking at AB2, right? Okay. So what is the indirect effect? Minus multiplied by plus is minus. Okay. So this is a minus and this is a minus. So they are pointing at the same direction. Therefore, it's complementary. What is this? Okay, minus multiplied by plus, it's minus. No, but this is plus. When is minus, when is plus, therefore it's competitive. And then we establish an easier way of doing that. That is basically A multiplied by B by C. When you 3 multiply with each other, and we can show you the mathematics of how it works, but it's definite. We definitively prove that when it's negative, it's competitive, and when it's positive, it's above 0, then it's complementary. So it's a relatively simple test. You do not need to run the statistics. You just put in the calculator and actually you can just look at it, right? You just multiply the 3. Yes.
I was wondering if you could just maybe touch on sort of conceptually how the approach that you're talking about compares, fits with, say, spherical equation modeling, where similarly you're not focusing on, say, independent, or an overall effect, and then trying to break it down. You're just focusing on the paths. Obviously, a lot more variables, but how does that approach sort of compare?
It's very interesting, actually. One of the reviewers at last stage, the paper was accepted and then rejected because one reviewer just published an article saying that everything should be done with the structural equation modeling instead of going back to Barron and Kenny anymore. What we are seeing is what we are doing is not even today. I talked about bootstrap and regression because that's what Barron and Kenny originally did. But and it's easy to understand conceptually. But what we did can be used when you use the structural equation. What we did is more conceptual than statistical. And even when you use the structural equation modeling, if you are dealing with only 3 variables, you can still use this, and you should still use this to, number one, establish whether or not there is an effect mediation. Lizro or any other program will not tell you whether or not there is a mediation. They will just give you A, B, C, D, or C, all those. And you still need to, you should still use our decision tree to say, number one, whether or not there is a mediation, and number 2, what types it is. Again, structural equation modeling will not tell you whether or not there is full mediation or partial mediation if you follow Barron and Kenny, or if there is a competitive or complementary or direct, indirect only mediation if you follow our procedure. So there is no conflict between the two, although most of people think of structural equation modeling as more than 3 variables, right? And so we say, yeah, you should, if you have three or more variables, you should use the linear structural equation modeling, although keep in mind, as long as you have a non-recursive model, which is most of people do, when you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 variables. And when you have a non-recursive model, a more complicated model is basically combination of these 3 variable situations. And then a conceptual understanding of this, I would argue, very complicated situation, but have a conceptual grasp of it will only help. And it's necessary, I think, it's the fundamental. That's why we concentrate on 3 variable situations. Once you got that conceptual, and our argument is that Barron and Kenny got conceptually wrong. And only when you did it, you understand it conceptually, then you can more competently analyze the larger models with more variables in. So a short answer is that there is no conflict. We think of it as in addition to whatever the statistical procedures that you use, either regression or path analysis or linear structural equation modeling or any other types. That bootstrap is another situation. Although it's very difficult to use only the linear structural equation modeling. Number one, it does not do bootstrap. We are arguing that when you test A multiplied by B, bootstrap is still better. Linear structural equation modeling still assume the shape of distributions to be normal. And bootstrap does not assume that. So it's a little bit of it's a little bit of an advantage that, although not too much in my view. And then secondly, later work that we are working on, that we are putting together, is arguing. Let's see. You can see that an expanded one is not in the paper, and I'm still debating with my co-authors and trying to persuade them that that would be important. C prime still is important. And Johns is right. He says that right now everybody believes C prime is necessary to establish mediation. And we just come out and say that C prime doesn't matter if you want to establish mediation. And then when I said C prime does matter, and sometimes matter a lot, it confuses the audience. And so we agree to take it out. But later we will argue that C prime does matter if you want to get into better understanding of the situation. Actually, for practical research, it's extremely important. So we've got that paper written out, draft written out. And the C prime cannot be easily calculated in the Lisrow linear structural equation modeling. You have to separately run, or you separately run a Lisrow with only x and y. But that'd be the whole purpose, right? It's just like a regression. So in other words, what statistical methods you use, we don't really care. You should understand all those tools, but you should not define your research based on one tool, regression, or linear structural equation modeling, or bootstrap, or whatever. What we believe is that conceptual understanding is a lot more important. All those tools, you should acquire them, but it's not as a major issue as researchers. Yes.
I just want to ask a question about the Sobel test.
Okay.
Is that the same? Because that's testing the indirect effect to see if it's significant. So it's the same as A times B. Is that right?
Okay. The bootstrap basically it says that you should test. Let me still go back to the. The Barron and Kenny asks you to do these three things. And then, of course, we see that this is not as important and totally irrelevant if you just want to establish mediation. So you left these two, and they want you to test A, make sure that A is significant, and then make sure B is significant separately. And then in the same paper, in the 1986 paper, they also say that you should do a, what's that name, a Sobel test. The idea is that you should test A multiplied by B simultaneously. So that has always been considered, even by Barron and Kenny in 1986, to be a better test. Okay, just more accurate statistically. What we are arguing is not really our argument, it's just taking advantage of the statistical development since then, saying that Sobel test has its limitations because it still assumes the normal distribution, which is typically not the case, and so on, and therefore you should use the bootstrap. So you can think of bootstrap basically as a more accurate test than a more accurate version of the Sobel test. So in comparison with the A-B separate A-B test, number one, it does it simultaneously. Number two, it does not make an assumption about the distribution of the sample.
But the Sobel test, if you had an even competitive situation, would still show an interaction effect.
Yes, and even if we don't have an even distribution, it may still show. And my prediction is that 99 out of 100, possibly more, it doesn't make a difference between any of the three tests: an A-B separate test, a Sobel test versus a bootstrap test. And in our example, it didn't make a difference in any of these. And I've analyzed many of those data, and in my experience, those arguments about which test is more accurate never made a difference in my analysis of any of my data. But on the other hand, if what the statistician considered to be more advanced test is as simple, as easy, why not? It's just because the reviewers tend to want to argue about these things, and so if it doesn't make a difference, why just do what they want you to do? Okay. Thank you.